When you really look at the musical landscape of 1977, it shouldn't have happened.
It's a complete anomaly.
Right. You have the Sex Pistols screaming, "God Save the Queen." You've got this clash of punk and disco fighting for the soul of the charts. The entire industry is pivoting toward aggression and speed and volume. And then, amidst all that noise and spit, you have this guy in a headband sort of mumbling about a jazz band in a pub playing the cleanest guitar tone you have ever heard.
It is the ultimate outlier. When you actually analyze the charts from that specific year, the prevailing trends they were the polar opposite of what this band was offering.
Exactly. Yeah. And anomalies like that usually become, cult classics?
Or footnotes. They do not typically become the acts that sell between 100 and 120 million records worldwide.
And that's exactly what we're looking at today. This isn't just a biography of Dire Straits. We are analyzing a very specific contradiction. How do you become the biggest band on the planet? I mean, literally the sound of the 1980s, when your frontman treats celebrity like an allergic reaction.
It's a fascinating case study in trajectory.
We're talking about a band that managed to bridge the gap between pub rock, jazz, folk, and this massive stadium sound of the mid-80s, all while its leader was trying to remain invisible.
And if you just look at the data, you're looking at a band that won 4 Grammy Awards. They spent over 1,100 weeks on the UK albums chart.
Incredible.
Yet the central figure, Mark Knopfler, eventually just dismantled the entire machine because it became, and this is his word, dehumanizing.
So we're going to cover their formation back in 1977, their rise to absolute global dominance in 1985, and then the dissolution that followed in 1995.
And we'll also touch on the post-band years leading right up to where things stand now.
But let's start at the beginning. The geography here is really important. We're not talking about a band that formed in some glitzy studio in Los Angeles or, the art schools of New York. We're talking about Deptford, Southeast London, in 1977.
The demographic of the bandit formation is also quite distinct from many of their punk rock contemporaries of that year. You had the brothers, Mark and David Knopfler, who were from Glasgow but grew up in Blyth in the northeast of England. Then you had John Illsley and Pick Withers, who were both from Leicester.
Okay, let's ground this in the geography for a second. Because Deptford, 1977, isn't just a pin on a map. If you were living in a council flat there at that time, life wasn't exactly Technicolor.
No, it was not.
This is the era leading right up to the winter of discontent in the UK. You have high unemployment, trash piling up on the streets, just a general sense of economic gloom hanging over everything.
That's correct. The economic indicators for the UK in the late 1970s showed significant inflation and widespread labor unrest. And the band members were, in fact, living in Firehouse, which was a council block.
So this wasn't some romanticized, bohemian artist existence.
Yeah. No, this was a gritty reality.
And the people in the band, their demographic, it's fascinating because it completely defies the punk ethos. Punk was all about youth rage, right? Burning it all down.
Yes.
These guys, they had jobs. They had rent to pay. Mark Knopfler was, 27, 28 years old? In rock and roll years, especially for a debut album, that's practically middle-aged.
Their backgrounds were professional. Mark Knopfler was working as an English teacher at Lawton College.
An English teacher.
Yes. His brother David was a social worker. John Illsley was studying sociology at Goldsmiths College. And then you had Pick Withers, the drummer, who was already a 10-year veteran of the music business.
That teaching background for Mark Knopfler explains so much about the lyrics we would hear later. You don't write songs like Romeo and Juliet or Telegraph Road. These songs with incredible narrative density without having dissected some poetry and literature first. He wasn't writing slogans. He was writing short stories.
That literary influence is quantifiable in his songwriting structure. He often uses distinct characters and third-person perspectives, which we can get into. But you mentioned Pick Withers. His background is statistically very significant for the band's sound.
How so?
He had been a session drummer for people like Dave Edmunds and Jerry Rafferty. He was the house drummer at Rockfield Studios for a time.
Okay, so you have this mix of working professionals, a teacher, a social worker, and this seasoned session musician, all convening in a council flat. That experience that Pick Withers brought is it's crucial.
It is.
Most punk drummers were playing right on the beat, very aggressive, very forward. Pick Withers played behind the beat.
Yeah.
He had this jazz sensibility. He played quietly.
And that quietness wasn't just a stylistic choice. It was a necessity driven by their environment.
Right.
They started out rehearsing in the kitchen of a friend, Simon Cowell. And because it was a council flat with thin walls, they couldn't plug into big amplifiers. They had to play at a conversational volume just to avoid the neighbors calling the police.
Which forces you to listen to each other. It completely dictates the technique. Mark Knopfler couldn't hide behind a wall of distortion like the punk bands were doing.
Yeah.
He had to develop that finger-picking style, that claw, where he's pinching the strings, creating his own rhythm, because he doesn't have a massive rhythm section just drowning him out.
Yeah.
That classic Dire Straits sound wasn't some grand stylistic choice initially.
It was a byproduct of their architecture.
Exactly.
It's also worth noting the origin of the name. They initially performed under the name Cafe Racers.
Which is a nod to the motorcycle culture of the 60s.
It is. But the name Dire Straits was coined by a musician flatmate of Pickwithers. The implication was literal. Their financial situation was precarious.
So that kitchen rehearsal period is where it all started to gel. In 1977, they recorded a 5-song demo tape. And this tape is, it's legendary in the band's history.
It is. It included Water of Love, Down to the Waterline, and a track called Sultans of Swing.
And this is where they hit their first big hurdle.
Yes. This brings us to the first major obstacle in their dataset. They took this tape to MCA in Soho, and they were rejected. The executives simply did not see any commercial potential in the material.
It is so hard to imagine turning down Sultans of Swing. It's one of those songs that feels like it's just always existed. But in the context of 1977, I guess it probably sounded like elevator music to an executive who's looking for the next Sex Pistols.
It did not fit the current market trends, but the band didn't give up. They sent the tape to a DJ named Charlie Gillett.
At BBC Radio London.
Correct. He had a show called Honky Tonk. And their intent initially was not even to secure airplay. They just wanted some professional advice.
But Gillette heard something in it. He liked it so much he just played Sultans of Swing on the air.
And that exposure was the catalyst.
It's a classic example of the gatekeeper effect. Once one person with influence validates it, the floodgates just open.
And they did. 2 months later, Dire Straits signed a recording contract with the Vertigo Records division of Phonogram Inc.
So this leads to the debut album, simply titled Dire Straits.
Recorded in February 1978, the budget was £12,500.
Which even then was pretty modest.
By industry standards, yes, a very modest sum. It was produced by Muff Winwood at Basing Street Studios in Notting Hill.
And the lyrical themes on this album really set the tone for Knopfler's whole writing style. It wasn't generic rock and roll posturing.
Yeah.
It was so grounded in geography and observation.
It was. Down to the Waterline, for example, isn't just a song about a place. It's filled with images from his life in Newcastle.
And In the Gallery is another great example.
In the Gallery was a tribute to a lead sculptor named Harry Phillips. He was the father of Steve Phillips, a future collaborator of Knopfler's. The song is a critique of the art world's tendency to ignore real talent until it's validated by trends. Then you have songs like Wild West End and Lions, which were drawn directly from Knopfler's early days living in London. It was observational storytelling. He was documenting the world around him rather than putting himself at the center of it.
And despite the quality of the record, it wasn't an overnight explosion in the UK, was it?
No, the sales trajectory was slow at first. The album initially came to the attention of an A&R person, Corinne Berg, at Warner Bros. Records in New York.
Okay.
She felt audiences were hungry for this kind of music, but apparently she was the only person in her department who thought so.
So how did it break?
The band began touring as an opening act for Talking Heads.
Now that is a fascinating pairing. Talking Heads are, very art school new wave, very jittery and neurotic in this brilliant way. And then you have Dire Straits, who are laid back and bluesy and rooted in tradition. It must have been a really strange contrast for the audience.
The tour definitely helped. Sultans of Swing started to climb the UK charts. But interestingly, the data shows they topped the charts in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand before they hit the top in the UK.
So the rest of the world caught on first.
It seems so. The album eventually went top 10 in every European country.
And by 1979, they're launching their first North American tour. They played, 51 sold-out concerts in just 38 days?
That's correct. A grueling schedule for a band that was used to playing pubs just a year or two before.
Sure.
And Sultans of Swing finally reached number 4 in the US and number 8 in the UK. It became a fixture. But a very significant endorsement came from a peer.
Ah, yes, Bob Dylan.
Bob Dylan saw them play a show in Los Angeles.
This has to be a huge moment for any band. But if you're Mark Knopfler, a songwriter who bases so much of his phrasing and lyrical density on Dylan's work, that has to be both terrifying and exhilarating.
One would assume so. Dylan was so impressed that he invited Mark Knopfler and the drummer, Pick Withers, to play on his next album.
Which was Slow Train Coming.
Correct. That validation cemented their reputation as serious musicians. It moved them out of the pop act category and put them into a lineage of serious rock and roll songwriters.
Okay, so let's move on to the second album, Communique. This was released in June of '79. They went to the Bahamas for this one.
They recorded at Compass Point Studios in Nassau. It was produced by the legendary Jerry Wexler and Barry Beckett.
Right.
And the chart performance here reveals something very interesting about their growing popularity, particularly in Europe. Communique went to #1 on the German album charts, while their debut album was still sitting at #3.
Wow. That is dominance. Having two albums in the top 3 in a major market like Germany. But critically, this album is often viewed as sort of Dire Straits Part 2. It didn't stray too far from the formula of the debut.
Stylistically, it was very similar. It featured the single Lady Writer, and it continued that same observational lyricism. However, as we move into 1980, the internal dynamic of the band began to shift pretty significantly.
The stress of the constant touring and recording was starting to show.
Yes.
Which brings us to the third album, Making Movies, released in October 1980. This is the pivot point. This is where the band stops being a pub rock band and starts becoming something much bigger, much more cinematic.
But it came at a cost.
A big one.
Tensions between the brothers, Mark and David Knopfler, reached a breaking point during these sessions.
And David left the band.
He did. He decided to leave to pursue a solo career. The specific reasons cited usually revolve around creative control and the general pressure of the environment.
So during the recording, they were down to a trio, essentially.
Yes. It was Mark Knopfler, John Illsley, and Pick Withers who continued. They brought in a session musician, Sid McGuinness, on rhythm guitar, though he was uncredited. And crucially, they brought in Roy Bittan from Bruce Springsteen's E Street Band to play keyboards.
And that Roy Bittan influence is audible immediately. The whole sound shifted, the songs got longer, the arrangements became more complex. The piano became a lead instrument right alongside the guitar.
Making Movies also featured some of Knopfler's most personal compositions. Romeo and Juliet is a prime example.
An absolute classic.
It reached #8 in the UK. It's a song about a failed love affair, but Knopfler used fictitious names, which became something of a trademark for him. He creates a distance between his personal life and the art by filtering it through these characters.
Romeo and Juliet is arguably one of the best written songs of that decade. I mean, it takes a classic Shakespearean trope and completely modernizes it.
Yeah.
You have Romeo singing the streets a serenade, and Juliet's just, she's not interested anymore. It captures that specific kind of heartbreak where one person moves on while the other is still stuck in the movie.
And we also have to mention Tunnel of Love.
A huge track.
A massive track. It opens with the Carousel Waltz by Rodgers and Hammerstein.
Right.
It was featured in the Richard Gere film An Officer and a Gentleman. And even though it only reached #54 as a single in the UK, it became one of their most famous live staples.
The structure of that song is incredible. It's so progressive. It moves through these different movements rather than a standard verse, chorus, verse.
It does. And another track from that album, Solid Rock, also became a permanent fixture in their live shows. It showed they could still play straight-ahead rock, but the texture was different now. It was much fuller.
So after the recording, they had to fill out the lineup for the tour.
They did. They added keyboardist Alan Clark and guitarist Hal Linz as full-time members. And this new 5-piece lineup toured Europe, North America, and Oceania. This marked the transition from playing clubs and theaters to playing arenas.
So moving on to 1982, we get to Love Over Gold. This is where Knopfler really takes the reins as the sole producer. And talk about taking a commercial risk. If Making Movies was cinematic, Love Over Gold is practically a symphony.
It was a significant commercial risk. This was an album of songs filled with lengthy instrumental passages, focusing very heavily on piano and keyboard work. There are only 5 songs on the entire album.
Just 5. And the title, Love Over Gold.
That was inspired by graffiti Knopfler saw from the window of his old council flat in Deptford.
And despite the long songs, it was a huge hit.
It was. It spent 4 weeks at #1 in the United Kingdom, and consider the single Private Investigations. This is a track that is almost 7 minutes long. It has a long spoken word section. It has a classical guitar intro. It has the sound of breaking glass.
I mean, in an era of 3-minute pop songs, that is just It's unheard of. You don't put a 7-minute brooding noir detective story on daytime radio.
And yet it reached #2 in the UK charts. It gave them their first top 5 hit in their home country. It really demonstrates that the audience was willing to follow Knopfler into these more complex, more atmospheric territories.
There's another important track on there, Industrial Disease.
That was the main single in other parts of the world, particularly in Canada, where it was a top 10 hit. The subject matter is very specific. It's a look at the decline of the British manufacturing industry in the early 1980s.
So it's dealing with strikes, depression.
Dysfunctionality, yes. It uses humor and satire to address some very serious socioeconomic issues of the time.
And the album also features the 14-minute epic Telegraph Road,
Which, again, shows the band moving even further away from the concise pub rock of their debut into something much more cinematic and progressive. Telegraph Road is essentially a history of development in America.
It charts the path from a wilderness trail to a 6-lane highway.
While mirroring the collapse of a relationship. It's a complex piece of songwriting. Also, it's during this period that Knopfler wrote the song Private Dancer.
But it didn't appear on the album.
No. He gave it to Tina Turner, and it became the title track of her massive comeback album.
After Love Over Gold, there was another major personnel change. Pick Withers, the original drummer, the guy with that subtle jazz touch, he left the band.
He did. He was replaced by Terry Williams, who was formerly of the band Rockpile. This change happened shortly after the recording sessions were completed, and Terry Williams brought a much heavier, more rock-oriented style compared to Withers' touch.
So we are now in the prelude to their absolute peak. In 1983, they released an EP called Extended Dance Play,
which featured the song Twisting by the Pool. That reached the top 20 in the UK and Canada. It was a bit more upbeat, a return to their rock and roll roots, almost a palate cleanser after the seriousness of Love Over Gold.
And they were still touring heavily. The Love Over Gold tour finished with 2 concerts at London's Hammersmith Odeon in July 1983, and this resulted in the double album Alchemy Live,
which was released in March 1984. It reached the top 3 in the UK. A key detail about Alchemy Live is that it was reportedly released without any studio overdubs.
Which was rare at the time.
Very. In an era of live albums where bands would routinely go back and re-record mistakes in the studio, Alchemy was a very honest representation of the band's live power. It showcased the improvisation and the extended solos that really defined their live act.
We should also touch on Knopfler's side projects during this time, because they really fed into the band's status. He wrote the score for the film Local Hero.
Released in 1983, it received a BAFTA nomination. The closing track, Going Home, theme of the Local Hero, became iconic.
It's played before every home game of Newcastle United Football Club.
It is. And it also became a live staple for Dire Straits, often used as the final encore. This soundtrack work really established Knopfler as a serious composer, not just a band member.
Okay. Now, we arrive at the main event. Late 1984. The band goes to AR Studios in Montserrat to record their 5th studio album, Brothers in Arms. This is the moment where everything, and I mean everything, changes.
This is where the trajectory goes vertical. But the recording process itself was volatile regarding personnel. Guy Fletcher had joined as a second keyboardist, which allowed for the broader synthesizer tones that Knopfler wanted. However, Hal Linz, the guitarist, left early in the sessions.
Why was that?
The reports cite social disagreements. And there was also drama in the drum department. This is a critical point regarding the actual sound of the album.
Oh, right. This is significant.
Very. Terry Williams, who had replaced Pick Withers, was temporarily suspended from the recording sessions. The production team, Knopfler and Neil Dorfsman, were not happy with his drumming in relation to the sound they were trying to achieve. They felt he struggled with the click track, which is essential for digital recording synchronization. So they brought in Omar Hakim, a jazz and session drummer.
So the drums on most of the album.
Yeah.
That's Omar Hakim.
Yes. Omar Hakim re-recorded almost all of the drum parts in a 2 or 3 day session. It was an incredibly efficient process. Terry Williams was retained for the music videos and the subsequent tour, but the record itself is largely Hakim's performance.
And Jack Sani joined as the rhythm guitarist.
Correct.
So we get to 1985, and we have to talk about the elephant in the room, the compact disc. Brothers in Arms isn't just an album. It's the killer app for a new piece of hardware.
It is the hardware seller. Before this album, CDs were a novelty item, mainly for audiophiles, but Knopfler and Neil Dorfsman made a conscious decision to record on a Sony 24-track digital tape machine. This is the famous DDD code you'd see on the back of the jewel case.
Digital recording, digital mixing, digital mastering. For the listener who isn't an audio engineer, why does that matter so much? Why did digital suit this band specifically?
Because of the silence.
The silence.
Analog tape has hiss. It has a noise floor. If you play quiet, atmospheric music on tape, you hear that hiss in the background. Dire Straits, going all the way back to those quiet Deptford rehearsals, relied on dynamics. They had moments of near silence in songs like Brothers in Arms or the intro to Money for Nothing.
So when you put that CD in and the background is absolute zero.
It is startling. The drums punch through emptiness. That dynamic range, the difference between the quietest whisper and the loudest snare hit, was massive on this record. It was the first time a rock band sounded high definition. It became the first album to sell 1 million copies on CD.
It's so ironic, though. Mark Knopfler, the guy who loves old folk and country and pub rock, becomes the poster child for the cold digital future.
And he struggled with it. He actually felt the digital sound was too clinical. Reports say he spent years afterward trying to warm it back up in his productions.
But in 1985, that pristine, icy sound was exactly what the world wanted.
Precisely. The album was the best-selling album of 1985 in the UK. It spent 228 weeks on the charts. It sold over 30 million copies worldwide. It spent 34 weeks at #1 in Australia alone.
And the singles were just ubiquitous.
Yeah.
Money for Nothing.
Which reached #1 in the US and #4 in the UK. It was the first video ever played on MTV Europe.
We need to clear up the Sting connection on that song. He's credited as a co-writer.
He provided guest vocals, singing the I Want My MTV line. He received a co-writing credit, but strictly because the melody of that line resembled Don't Stand So Close to Me by The Police.
So he didn't write the lyrics.
No, Sting did not read the lyrics. Those were all Knopfler's. The lyrics were actually based on a conversation Knopfler overheard in an appliance store in New York, where a delivery man was complaining about rock stars on the televisions he was moving.
Amazing. And then there's Walk of Life,
which was nearly excluded from the album. Producer Neil Dorfman voted against it. He thought it was too simple, too bubblegum. But the band outvoted him. It went on to peak at #2 in the UK and #7 in the US.
The title track, Brothers in Arms, is a bit darker, though.
It deals with the senselessness of war. It was written during the Falklands War of 1982. It has since become a favorite at military funerals. The song is notable for its atmospheric production and the lack of a traditional chorus, relying instead on that iconic guitar melody to carry the emotional weight.
The tour that followed this album was just a phenomenon. The 1985-1986 Brothers in Arms World Tour.
They sold over 2.5 million tickets. They played 248 shows in over 100 cities.
And right in the middle of all that, there was Live Aid.
July 13th, 1985. They were in the middle of a 13-night residency at Wembley Arena.
So they're already in town.
They literally moved down the road to Wembley Stadium to play their slot at Live Aid, then went back to the arena to play their own show that same night.
That is just incredible stamina.
Their Live Aid set included Money for Nothing with Sting. It solidified their status as absolute global superstars. They also set a record in Australia, 21 consecutive nights at the Sydney Entertainment Centre.
But this level of success always has a cost.
Yeah.
You can't sustain that kind of intensity forever.
No. And this leads us to the fatigue and the first dissolution. After the tour finally ended in 1986, Mark Knopfler took a break. He told Rolling Stone magazine, and I'm paraphrasing, a lot of press reports were saying we were the biggest band in the world. There's not an accent then on the music, there's an accent on popularity. I needed a rest.
But they did regroup briefly in 1988 for the Nelson Mandela 70th birthday tribute concert.
They did. Jack Sawhney couldn't play because his twin daughters were being born, so Eric Clapton filled in on rhythm guitar. But shortly after that, in September 1988, Knopfler officially announced the dissolution of the band.
And he moved on to something completely different, the Notting Hillbillies.
This was a clear retreat from the stadium rock sound. It was a country-focused band formed in 1989. It featured Knopfler, Guy Fletcher, Brendan Croker, and Steve Phillips. Their manager, Ed Bicknell, even played drums.
So it's very low stakes.
Exactly. It was focused purely on the music. It was Knopfler trying to get back to playing small clubs and just enjoying the instrument again.
But the Dire Straits story wasn't quite over. In 1990, they reunited.
They did. Knopfler, John Illsley, Alan Clark, and Guy Fletcher. They brought in session players like Jeff Porcaro from Toto on drums, and they recorded what would be their final studio album, On Every Street.
Which was released in September 1991. How was it received compared to Brothers in Arms?
The reception was mixed. Some reviews called it underwhelming. However, commercially, it still performed very well by normal standards. It went straight to #1 in the UK and sold 15 million copies. But it didn't have the same cultural impact as its predecessor.
It was a different kind of record.
It was a more country-influenced, more atmospheric record.
The singles included Calling Elvis and The Bug.
Calling Elvis had a memorable video based on the TV show Thunderbirds, and The Bug featured backing vocals by country star Vince Gill.
Right, and they actually asked him to join the band full-time.
They did. Vince Gill was invited to join, but he declined in order to pursue his own solo career.
Then came the final tour, the On Every Street tour from 1991 to 1992. This is really the end of the road.
They played 300 shows to 7.1 million fans. But the atmosphere was, by all accounts, toxic. Manager Ed Bicknell described it as utter misery.
Wow.
John Illsley has said that personal relationships were in trouble and it put a terrible strain on everybody, emotionally and physically. Knopfler's marriage collapsed during this time. The sheer scale of the operation had just become unmanageable.
The final concert took place on October 9th, 1992, in Zaragoza, Spain.
And that was effectively it. A live album, On the Night, was released in 1993. Then in June of 1995, following a contractual release of Live at the BBC, Mark Knopfler quietly disbanded Dire Straits permanently.
And he gave a reason.
He stated, "That kind of scale is dehumanizing."
And since 1995, he has been very, very consistent about not reforming the band. He's turned down massive offers.
Extremely consistent, he launched a successful solo career, starting with the album Golden Heart in 1996. There have been minor reunions for charity, like in 2002, for 4 concerts under the name Mark Knopfler and Friends, but never a full Dire Straits revival.
The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction in 2018 was a particularly awkward moment.
It was. Dire Straits were inducted, but Mark Knopfler did not attend, and he didn't offer an official explanation.
So who accepted the award?
Bassist John Illsley attended, along with Alan Clark and Guy Fletcher. And it was unusual. They were the first act ever inducted without an introducer, and they did not perform. It spoke volumes about Knopfler's desire to distance himself from that legacy entity.
And sadly, we've lost some members in recent years.
Yes. Jack Sony, the guitarist from the Brothers in Arms era, passed away on August 30th, 2023.
And there's a touring entity now called Dire Straits Legacy.
Yes, that includes some former members like Alan Clark and Phil Palmer. John Illsley has also been involved from time to time, but Mark Knopfler is not a part of it.
And he's made his stance clear.
Very clear. John Illsley reiterated in November 2023 that he and Knopfler have no interest in reforming. He said they were, quote, mentally, physically, and emotionally exhausted by 1992, and that they had reached the end of the road.
It's just a remarkable journey. To go from a council flat in Deptford to playing the biggest stages in the world, selling 120 million albums, and then to consciously walk away from it all to save your sanity. It really forces you to question the value we place on fame versus the value of the art itself. At the end of the day, Knopfler chose the music over the machine.
He did.
Thanks for listening.